Welcome to React Week, your first React Week here at Lambda School. For those that don't know me, I don't think I've worked with you all yet. My name is Ryan Hamblin, and I am the Program Director of the Web Technologies team. So if you haven't met me, if we haven't had any one-on-one interaction, here we are. I may have seen you at some point or another along the way, but I don't think that I have spent time with you. But correct me if I'm wrong on that. So, okay. Is everyone getting a static buzzing from me as well? Or is that just Lucas? No? Hopefully not. Okay. I'll do my best. I've tried to configure my mic to be the best possible solution it can be, so let me know if something's not working well. It's not directly plugged into my machine. It's going through like a third-party USB outlet, so we'll take that time. Okay, so just out of curiosity, I guess we'll just recap regardless of where you're at. So we'll recap on what your pre-class assignment was for the weekend. It was to read through some of the documentation of React and then read through that first objective in the React 1 module. And let me actually break you down and show you where we're going to go for the week before I actually get started. I think that'll be a better use of our time. So with React Week, React 1 week, I should say, we actually take you through what's called React 1, okay, or just React. And there are 4 modules. Each day, Monday through Thursday, will be a different module, okay? So today, we are going to work through React 1 module, okay? And then tomorrow, React 2, Wednesday 3, and then Thursday 4, and then you'll have your sprint challenge. So that's kind of how the week's going to go. So if you want to follow along in Training Kit, the material that is also not only what we have prepared for you already, it's also being currently updated by yours truly as we go along as well. So as I kind of continuously teach this stuff, I like to add more content and get more links and more references for you. The assignments are all complete, however, and so because of that, we can move forward with this awesome learning process. So the first module, so what we tasked you to do over the weekend is learn about React, what potential problems it solves. So what is React and what potential problems does it solve? I'm curious if you want to just throw like a high-level version of what you learned on that over the weekend in Slack. What is React.js and what problems does it solve for us? Scaling and composability problems helps you have all your code organized. That's true. Beautiful answers. Basically simplifies DOM manipulation stuff. I love that too. Yes. So imagine now, instead of having direct access to manipulate the DOM, we have sort of an agent communicating between the browser and the developer. And that is React.js. That is the virtual DOM. And then we have abstractions on top of our actual code. And we're going to walk through a process of learning about React today with just a single index.html file. And we're going to show you the API that will be abstracted away from you piece by piece. And that's going to be super awesome. You're going to learn about React from the bottom up. So how React was built, sort of, in a high level, what happens to the code that we actually write in React, and how it corresponds and plays with one another. Let's see here. It's kind of like object-oriented programming for UI. There's also functional paradigms that are built into it as well. So the best part about React is it is unopinionated, meaning you could build an entire OOP project with React.js, or you could build an entire functional project with React.js. So it's unopinionated, okay? Allows you to store data in components, absolutely. Wait for it, reacts to data change. Yes, so reactive. React is reactive. Data changes, DOM gets updated, okay? And it gets updated in such a way that doesn't go and refresh and redraw the entire document object model. It doesn't refresh the entire page. It takes the path of least resistance to update the single thing that needs to be updated, no matter how nested it is in the DOM. Just that little tiny piece will be replaced. And the React team at Facebook has worked so hard on their engine, their reconciler, as well as it's called React Fiber. Fiber Core, if you're ever interested in learning more about it, there's a bunch of lightning talks, blog posts, and articles about it from the React team about how this stuff actually works. But we're not going to take you that deep in this course. We're going to actually give you the practical tools and skills to learn how to use React. And by the end of the day today, you're going to have built a couple of fun little user interfaces using solely functional components, okay? So, okay, I'm glad that you responded to that. That was kind of the challenge. And I encourage you to do this as well later on, maybe with a partner before you dig into the assignments this afternoon. Jump in with your partner and discuss why React is what it is and what problems it solves. Write down a paragraph and throw it in a Slack message to your project managers. Yes, all of these things are true, Abraham. It allows for efficient update of components instead of updating all components in a page. So if you already sent it to a PM, Justin, you did great. You followed along and you saw this little challenge right here. So that's for the first module or the first objective for today. Everything that we just kind of did a high gloss over why React exists, how it kind of works, and what it is. Okay, it's a JavaScript library that allows us many things, and among those things are rapid development, code organization, an unopinionated, unobstructed way into writing large-scale JavaScript applications. And if you think of companies like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, where there are potentially millions of users interacting with data, you would see that there is a perfect need for something like React.js to solve the problems of many people, accessing data at the same time. Okay, so let us plow forward and learn about React in general. So the first objective that we're going to go through this morning is learning how to set up a React environment and mount an application to the DOM using React and React DOM libraries. Okay. So at its core, React is pretty simple. The API is very straightforward and lightweight. Throughout this module this week, you're going to be learning all about how to take your code and get it, printing onto the screen, right? But we're going to start from the very bare bones. We're going to start right there with just a simple index.html file. Okay, so and you're just going to watch me do this and absorb this as a sponge for a minute, and then I'll give you some time to follow along this morning as we get through these exercises. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up my terminal. And I'm going to actually, I don't know if do I have CS9? Ooh, I do. Okay. So I have taught you something. No, I haven't. I just have an empty directory for you guys. Okay, cool. And I'm going to touch index.html. Just right there in its own little, as its own little file. Okay. Cool. We'll open that little document up. Okay, so React is actually very simple. It's a lot of the big challenge to learning React is that people tried to learn it by putting the cart before the horse initially, meaning they tried to set up an environment that takes your code, pre-compiles it, takes it through like a Webpack bundle and bundles it up, runs Babel over it and all these things. And I just said a lot of things like Webpack and Babel. We're not even going to touch Webpack for this assignment. For this first day, you're not even going to need to use it. In fact, all of your coding exercises this afternoon are going to be done in CodePen, which you're already familiar with, in React environments that are already going to be set up for you. So that's what's super cool about this is we get the opportunity to start from the ground up this week with React. We'll get to the more complex portions of the API as we continue to talk about like class components and things like that, and your knowledge grows. But for now, all we need to focus on is the idea that React takes what we write as programmers and passes it to a function called react.createElement. So first things first, I need to set up my React environment. And then we're going to be able to use this createElement function that is going to create DOM elements for us, okay? So I'm just going to boilerplate an HTML5 document. Cool, good to go there. And then right here, I'm going to have a single div. This div is going to be where my application lives and dies. So right here in our target, this div is where everything is going to be mounted to the DOM, right? So React is going to find this by ID, and it's going to shove all of our React code between this div. So it's really cool. It's just a single div and an HTML file, and then React does the rest. The React virtual DOM, works with our index.html file to shove stuff into the DOM, okay? And then we're also going to be using to set up our environment a couple of CDNs. Who knows what a CDN is? Who knows what CDN stands for? Just out of curiosity. Content Delivery Network. So what it is if I were to click on this link right here to go to unpackage.com, basically I can go and get the entire React source code pulled right into my screen. You guys have already done this with things like Bootstrap, maybe a little bit of jQuery in the past, things like that. So if I were to just navigate over to this package here, if you look, license version 16.3, which is the latest version of React, which is kind of cool because we could potentially use all the newest features if we wanted. Their copyright license, which MIT, and then this is all React.js. This is React. So that's all you're doing with a cross-origin script when you're pulling in a CDN, okay? So now everything we do is going to live and die in that div, and then we're also going to write our React code in between this script tag. So just keep it a text, type text, sorry, JavaScript, and that's going to break and not do anything for me. Okay, so type text JavaScript, and if I were to console.log this, and then open this document in Chrome, see if I can do that. Cool. Open it up, nothing really great on the screen, but if I inspect the element, you'll see that we're console logging hello right here in the console. So great, we are built into our environment here. And now that I have these CDNs pulled in, and I'm using them, and before the body opens and closes, or before the body ending body tag closes, I can use these script tags to pull in the React library and use part of the React ecosystem. So a lot of people are like, well, to get React up and running, you need a lot of boilerplate, and there's a lot of JavaScript fatigue to get React up and running. But it literally is this simple. Now, if you were going to build a large, giant project with a team, you're going to want to reference those things that I've mentioned earlier. Okay, but for now, this is all we virtually need to learn React. So let's not worry about all that boilerplate, all that process. Let's worry about the things that we actually care to learn about. Okay, so now we're ready to build a React application and mount it to the DOM, which is the title of this objective that we're working for. Okay, and once again, you're going to get the opportunity to do this in just a minute. Okay, you're going to kind of push to follow along. So let me just get through the demo of how we set up a React environment and do it ourselves. Okay, so first we're going to create a DOM element using react.createElement. So just to prove, well, we'll just move forward. I don't want to console log anything. So we're going to say react.createElement. So everything that you do in React when you're creating a DOM element will actually go through this API. Okay, even if you're creating or react.createClass, right? But either way, this function right here is the React API at large. This is what happens under the hood with your code. And you're going to kind of see how this kind of comes together. So in between our empty script tag, let's make an h1 element. So I'm going to call this const my element equals react.createElement, and I'm going to pass it its first argument. The argument I'm going to supply it is h1. So notice that this is just the string h1. So create element will take this and say the element that I want to create, it will be you finish the sentence. You type it out in Slack. What is the thing that react.createElement is going to create to the DOM? Close, Jacob. Remember, this is going to actually a header one. It's not a div. What's the physical thing that's going to be printed to the DOM? H1 element, so you're describing it, but I want to see it. There we go, Justin got it, right? And it's a DOM node, you're right. Justin Matthew, 10 points for Gryffindor. It's a DOM element, H1, self-closing, or closing, opening and closing. Beautiful, okay? So this is gonna virtually go and create that thing, which I know at the end of the day it's just an object or a DOM node or something that doesn't really look like what it is, but I just wanted to get that across to you. It's going to go and take this code, send it through the virtual DOM, and then eventually output that H1 to the screen for us. Okay. Now, there's a second argument that can be passed to the create element function, and that is a list of props, okay, or attributes that you want associated with your element. So for me, I'm going to say the attribute that I want is class name, and I'm just going to put in strings heading. Okay, so that way in styling land, I could select this as a class. Now, why on earth do you think we would be using class name instead of class here? Because at the end of the day, isn't it going to look like this? Class is a reserved keyword. That is exactly right. So at the end of the day, it's going to look just like this. Class equals, right? And this is what we'll be able to see when we go inspect element. And it's going to say heading, which is a terrible name for a class, by the way. But anyway, this is what happens. The React virtual DOM takes this camel case class name, and whatever is found here, it appends that to the DOM this way, just like this. So this is what we're going to create. And then the last thing you send to this is some sort of children. Now, children would be what comes between the tags. So if I were to say hello world from React, this is what we're trying to create, right? All you need to do to pass or to allow that to happen is tell this H1's children to be this text. Hello world from React. So it really is, at the end of the day, that simple to get something up and running off the ground. But now, what do we need to do to tell this to live inside of our document? Right now, it's just in a script tag, and we're not really doing anything with it. It's just an element that's going to be created. What do you think we need to do? Yeah, we need to select target. And what's the method we use to select the target? Document dot. Yeah, we're going to use render. You're right. You guys are perfect. Those of y'all who've read ahead or seen this before, we're going to use get element by ID. So no different than anything you've done before, except that we're going to pass it through what we call the render function from React DOM. Now, React DOM is a package that used to be a part of the React ecosystem. It is now a separate package that Facebook still uses to mount a React application to the DOM. So when we call React DOM.render, it's going to go and it's going to take two arguments. The first argument is the thing we want rendered, so my element. And then the next argument is going to be where we want that thing rendered, which is going to be document.getElementById. And what do you think we need to pass here in order to mount it to the DOM? And I believe it was Justin Rigler who mentioned it earlier. It was. We need to pass the target ID, right? Perfect. So at the end of the day, it's very, very simple. This is your very first Hello World application using React.js. And let's actually refresh the page. And if you notice, check it out. Check what we get from this. And I want you to see, before I let you just do this for the next 5 minutes, I'll give you the boilerplate code for it, okay? And then you'll open it up in an index.html document and do it on your own for just a minute. I want to show you this real quick before we break for 5 minutes to practice this. I want you to see what this element is, okay? Because it's actually really powerful when you look at it and break it all down. So if you notice, it's that symbol type in JavaScript, which is sort of one of the newer types that come with ES6. But you can research that and figure out all the cool things that come with that on their own. It's a lot of deep stuff there, and I would not be able to do it justice to go into that right now. But if you notice, that's what we're logging out. It's an object, it's a type of, and it's a symbol. Okay, and here we go. Check out our props. So every single thing that nests between this. The opening and closing H1 tag is going to be found on props.children. Okay, and I'm going to demonstrate why that's so cool in just a second. And then notice we got this other thing called class name and heading. So you have this thing called props. And props is one of the quintessential fundamental engines and paradigms of React that make it so powerful. And we're gonna learn how to use props later on in this week, and even a little bit today, to get some cool stuff built out to the screen. Okay, So you're looking at this and you're like, how is this effective? Well, we're not quite there yet. We're going to take this and we're going to learn how to abstract this a little bit throughout the morning, and you're going to learn how to build this stuff with components. But just to demonstrate the power of this props.children, one of the things that you could pass to this h1 tag, and I'm actually going to change it to a div just for kicks and giggles. We'll save that, let it do its thing, and refresh the page. And notice the type is now a div instead of an h1. And then you notice up here it's a little bit smaller text. It's kind of the default text. But one thing you can do instead of passing just text is another React element. So I can go react.createElement and assign it whatever I want here. So now inside of my div, we're going to do that h1 tag. We're going to pass null. I don't care about any props or any elements or anything on here. And then all I'm going to do is just pass that string hello world from React. Once again, refresh the page, and boom, look what we have. We're back to nested elements. Sorry, text editor was being weird. We're back to nested elements where now we have a div that is wrapping an h1 tag. And you can nest as many of these sibling elements, or you can nest them even further and further and further as much as you would like. Okay. Now, if I look at the actual elements under the hood, notice our div with the ID of target is just chilling. It's living there. And injected into it is our div with the class heading. Remember, we specified that as class name. That's how React appends classes to our elements. And then we shoved in a nested child. Okay. So if I wanted to look at my element.props.children, we would be able to see this right here, which is really cool. Once again, to prove that, my element.props.children, it's another symbol type that has no attributes other than children that are the string hello world from React. And at large, in a nutshell, this is how React works. Very, very simple and straightforward. Everything that you create gets sort of piped through create element in this way. Now, imagine if you had to build an application like this, right? Would you find that very effective? Wouldn't you rather just write your HTML? Haha, Lucas, you actually just asked the same question. You answered the question that I was trying to ask. If you wanted to add plenty of elements, is it not redundant? It is redundant, which is why the next portion of what we're about to learn is actually very, very powerful. But for now, in terms of this hello world from React example, I want everyone to create this very document and save it and then get it up and running in a browser of your choice. I recommend Chrome because it's just easiest to work with. And then if you want, here is the code, the boilerplate code. That's not it. There it is. So there's the boilerplate code. Open up an index.html file and do that same exact thing that I just did, and get an element mounted to the DOM that is an H1, just a single H1 with your name printed to the DOM, being greeted by the React ecosystem. And I'll give you 5 minutes to do that, and I will stop or pause the video so that we don't have this long pause during the recording. So 5 minutes, go ahead, get that up and running, and we'll meet back. Okay, so we're now talking about how React.createElement does not scale. Okay, it's not easy to just write all of this stuff, over and over again in our application. However, the React team gives us this thing called JSX, and it's sort of the abstraction to this React.createElement. But it's also kind of cumbersome because it combines two paradigms, HTML and JavaScript. Okay, so it's JSX. All right, so writing our entire application using React.createElement is totally possible, but it is really cumbersome and doesn't lend itself to this idea of do not repeat yourself, the dry principle, right? So the React team created JSX as an abstraction for us to get this type of thing done. Keep in mind that React takes your JSX and boils it down through the React.createElement calls. That is why it's so important to understand a little bit about this particular method that we just discovered. So let's take a look at what JSX syntax looks like. At first, it may seem really familiar to you, so you should feel at home here, all right? So we just got done with a few weeks of learning all about, all about elements and things like that, HTML, DOM manipulation, JavaScript, a bunch of stuff, okay? Now we get the opportunity to sort of combine the two in the same paradigm. So yes, at first, it may feel we are going to rewrite this entire, we're just going to do this H1 tag, this element, using JSX. And so I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to delete everything after this, okay? And I'm going to just paste this above and comment it out so that I can reference it. And so now we're gonna write this element in JSX, okay? So we're just gonna say H1 and closing H1. And feel free to follow along with me if you would like at this point. That is totally fine, okay? And then inside here, hello world from React. All right, cool. We got some stuff going on here. I'm going to turn off my auto syntax highlighter real quick because we're not in a JSX document or a JavaScript document. So falsify that. Okay. So that way I don't get auto formatting where it doesn't belong. Okay. So check this out. What's so cool about this? Who has thoughts or comments or concerns or ideas about why this is nice? The above line right here can now be abstracted into this. So why is that cool? I think it's cool exactly for what Lucas mentioned. You can write it just like it's HTML, and you're already familiar with it, and it's very readable. Absolutely. These are all, thanks Cruz and Christopher. It's way easier to read. Okay? If you're like me, you're probably thinking to yourself right now, what in the JavaScript inside of HTML? It's exactly what it looks like. That line of code above is JavaScript, or at least it will become JavaScript. Okay? So this line of code right here is technically going to become JavaScript and then transformed back into some sort of markup. And then, yeah, we could actually add a class name. So let's add that class name. So let's do this real quick and say class name, because I forgot we had that on here at one point. And so if I wanted to add this on to that set of attributes, class name equals heading. Notice I'm using double quotes here because this is just like HTML. And usually when you're working in markup, you want to use double quotes. So you'll see a lot of the React documentation. Anytime there's JSX written and you're appending attributes to your element or props to this object, you use double quotes. Anytime I'm in JavaScript land, I use single quotes. It's just a convention. But yeah, this is more of a common practice. Notice I didn't say best practice, okay? It's a common practice, all right? Okay, and once again, class name is reserved in JavaScript, which is why, or class keyword is reserved in JavaScript, which is why the React team chose to use this camel case class name and use that to append classes to the DOM elements. Pretty nifty, right? So let's actually save this and let's see what happens when I refresh the page. Who thinks that this is going to refresh and it's going to work? Just like raise your hand in Slack if you think this is, if we've achieved our victory here. All right, Jacob's on. Teamwork. Nailey's on it will fail. Nope for Kevin. Sounds suspicious. Yeah, I'm definitely leading you towards failure. What in the world happened? I thought we were writing JavaScript and HTML, and we had this beautiful thing from React called JSX. Well, unfortunately, this is not JavaScript. It is not a readable form of JavaScript. Why, Ryan? Why? Tell me. I will tell you. This needs to be turned into JavaScript. So let's figure out how we can do that. Well, the idea here is that we have the opportunity to take a version of JavaScript or an abstracted version and transpile it or recompile it into a lesser version, a standard version that actually the browser can read. Because as it stands right now inside this JavaScript file, The browser does not know how to read this, okay? So let's go and find this cool thing. And initially, when I was planning this, this demo, I was not planning on using Babel to do this, but I just discovered this REPL on Babel. Well, not just, but I just rediscovered this REPL Babel. Try it out. Nope, I don't want to do that. I want to find the Babel REPL. Babel REPL. There it is. Okay, and you can all do the same thing here. Actually, that's exactly what it was going to do. Can't run away from Babel, yeah? Okay, so notice we have this really cool thing, and you can click the React flag. It's just kind of like a JS bin or something, but you can write a version of JavaScript here, which is going to be the new version, and it's going to output and transpile it over here. So if I say we're looking at ES 2015, which is the standard in-browser version, so ES6, and then I say I want the stage 2 presets, don't worry about presets for now, and then I worry, and then I say I want, so features of the language that we can use, and then I want to use React, so I'm going to be in the React ecosystem. So what I'm going to do first is I'm actually just going to write a function and see what we get in the output. I need to not have any errors in my function. Notice that I wrote an ES6 version of a JavaScript anonymous, well, it's a named function, okay? And notice the output here, okay? This is what Babel does for us. It takes a newer version of JavaScript and turns it into a lesser version so that all browsers can read it. So if I do the same thing with my JSX code, let's see what happens for us. I actually haven't run this full demo yet. Look at this, it's so cool. Okay, get excited about this, okay? So look at what we just discovered. We gave this, and we said it's gonna be React, so we made sure we initiated the React flag. It just came standard, but just make sure that that's turned on if you're trying to follow along and play along with this. We wrote this JavaScript, JSX looking HTML stuff, and look at what actually would be read by the JavaScript engine. How cool is that, right? So this under the hood is that. var myElement equals react.createElement, exactly what we just did. 3 individual arguments passed to that function. The type of element, the props or attributes we want appended to that element, and then the children for that element. Cool? Now, this is great and all, but how does this translate into our, into our very own index.html file? Well, we're about to get there right now. So I told you that in the beginning, people had a really rough time getting into React because of its ecosystem. It was really tough to get a React application off the ground because you needed something like Babel to take your JSX and turn it into readable JavaScript. Well, for us, we're very lucky that we can do this here for the intents and purposes of this demo inside of a single index.html document. The only difference is we need this CDN. So we're going to use the standalone library, Babel library, CDN, and we're going to put that in underneath our other React and React DOM CDNs as well. So go ahead and make sure that you update your document to be able to use Babel standalone. Okay. Now if I save this, I'm going to refresh it, and you're going to notice it's still broken. Okay. There's one thing I actually have to change here, and it's not going to be a super obvious thing every single time. I have to change how this JavaScript is read and interpreted by Babel. Okay. So if I give the instructions of Babel instead of JavaScript and save that, now we are back in React land. Okay. So this is what's super cool. I could take this and I could write all these elements and put them together, and we're good to go, right? I could build an entire, application and set it equal to my element, and then just simply pass that my element to the screen. Okay. So an entire working copy of what we have been working on is right here, and I want to make sure everyone has that in their index.html files that you're playing around with. okay? And I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to make sure that you get this hello world from React up in a Chrome browser, because the next part is going to be even better. If you thought this was cool, which, you know, by judgment of Lucas's celebration emoji, you're going to think the next part is even way cooler. And really, you can look at Babel and you can look at you can look at this all day. I could play around with this all day. You could take any form of JavaScript, so const my object, you know, equals an object with, you know, name, Ryan. I just love Babel so much that I want to play around with this for just a minute. And we're a little bit ahead of schedule anyway, so we're going to take a break in just a bit before we get to our next part. And then age equals, we'll say I'm 31. That's true. Okay, and then if I wanted to say const name and age from my object, let's see what it looks like to Babel. Whoa! Var name equals my object.name, var age equals my object.age. Notice there's a comma here instead of a semicolon. This is how you can namespace things as well. So object destructuring, that's all it is right here. Oh no, if an error occurred while loading Babel, is it this error you got? I wonder how that happened. Maybe too many of us are using unpackage at the same time. Oh, on the REPL. Just make sure that your presets are like this. ES 2015 stage 2 in React. That's what I'm using. So hopefully this works. And if there's an error, you might be able to figure out if maybe it's a syntax error or something. But yeah, you can play around with features like this all day. It's super cool. You know, another feature. So like const my array. I'm just trying to think of new like JSX feature or Java, whatever. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's do 1, 2, 3. Const my new array. 4, 5, and 6. Const combine array equals ... my array and ... my new array. And look at that. It's just using the concat method under the hood, giving us a new array of things. Isn't that so cool? Like this is something that after discovery, there's no reason in React land that we shouldn't be using all of the time. So I highly recommend anytime you have a question about an ES6 JavaScript feature, just come over to the REPL and start typing it out and see what's going on. Because that's all that this is doing under the hood. We're combining the two arrays. We're just spreading out their properties, right? So it's just like saying new array.concat, my array and my new array. So pretty cool, huh? I thought so. Yeah, you're welcome. I hope you really enjoy the Babel experience. Okay, I recommend, I'm using Chrome. Oh, Aaron, yeah, sorry, you were asking me. I thought you were asking me. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's just take a 5-minute break because the next hour is gonna really blow your mind and I want us to be like really fresh. So go get a cup of coffee or get a drink, step away from the screen. I'm gonna pause this and please remind me to start it again as soon as we're back. And I'll leave my screen up and running, but we'll get back at the top of the hour in just a moment, okay? Okay, welcome back. I hope you all had a good break. We'll step away. Now it's time to really see the benefits of React.js and why it is so amazing, okay? So remember, we used create element in the beginning to mount some sort of DOM elements to the screen. It's a function that's provided to you from the React library. It's a method you can pass arguments to that that allow you to create DOM elements, right? Essentially, that function takes your arguments you supply to it, passes it through the virtual DOM, and then it goes and generates your DOM tree, and it gives you access to it. Then we took that create class or create element method, and we abstracted it a little bit with this cool stuff called JSX. And we were able to play around with the Babel REPL for just a minute and figure out like why things work the way they do. This is exactly what the Chrome browser does anyway, right? It has this stuff built into it that can read ES6 and newer features, and we use Babel to take one feature that is maybe experimental or futuristic in terms of it's not a part of the standard, and it takes that code and makes it part of the standard. Okay, so JSX is an abstraction on React.createElement. So if JSX is an abstraction on React.createElement, the next thing that we're about to learn is a combination of using JSX and vanilla JavaScript to abstract things even further, to allow us to do some really, really cool stuff. Okay, and so everything that you do in React JS is going to live and die, or it's actually going to exist around this idea of components. So this next objective is to teach you to learn how components work and implement functional components to render a piece of UI to the screen. So everything we do in React revolves around components. They're the building blocks of any React application. And that's true. You can think of it as, you know, building a house, right? Just think of it in terms of like laying your bricks down. Like each brick, you know, you lay down and then eventually you have a big, beautiful house. There's so much more to it than that, of course, but you can think of components as a singular brick, a singular piece of the puzzle that allow you to construct your house, construct your program, okay? So today we're going to learn about this idea. There's many types of components, but what we're going to learn about is called a functional component or a functional stateless component, because we don't need any state as of yet. We're going to be using React to build some UIs. We don't need state necessarily at this point in our lives, okay? We just need components, all right? So here we go. So there are different types of components that we can use, and we're going to start with the simplest of types. It's called the functional component, as I mentioned. Simply put, we can use basic functions as components that return some sort of JSX. So these functions will simply return some sort of JSX, which will then be rendered out to the browser, okay? So we're going to take my element, and we're going to turn it into a component by simply saying, hey, my element, you're now a function, return, and I'm going to actually explicitly return this so that you know what's going on. Return some DOM, return some sort of DOM element, okay? And remember, we're still using Babel. I'm going to actually refresh this, and you're going to see something interesting happen. Where did our component go? Well, what's interesting, and I wonder if I can get this to show the way that I want it. It's not gonna show the way that I want it. But what's interesting is React or JSX and Babel in general can't just take these elements unless it knows how to take those elements and use them. Okay, so we get this opportunity now to actually write our components as if they are also JSX. Okay. So I just said a lot of things there, but just bear with me for 1 minute and how we're supposed to mount this. Now we're just trying to render. You notice we got a console error where it's like, warning, come on, show me the console. Show me the console. Refresh the page. I'm going to bump my screen down a little bit. I'm going to bump this screen down a little bit. There we go. There we go. Okay, back up. Cool. So warning, functions are not valid as a React child. So we have to actually give it something. So there's an actual error message here that I want you to focus on reading. This may happen if you return a component, like I'm doing, returning this component, instead of component from render. Or maybe you meant to call this function rather than return it. So we are passing this my element to render, which is going to return that element. Okay. So as a result, it's just a function. So we need to use this sort of syntax here, as opposed to just referencing the function itself. We're going to turn this into some sort of element. And you're going to see something really cool here that even those of us familiar with React, we may not know about. So what's interesting here, this is what's crazy, is I just told you we could do this, right? We could basically call component, the component that we created, my element, pass it in, but what's crazy is because this is lowercase, the React virtual DOM does not know how to interpolate it. It does not know how to reconcile it the proper way. So look at what it's trying to do here. It's trying to mount a web component called myElement. Okay? So that is a kicker. That is a gotcha in React that people don't really know about. You need to name your elements as capital. Your components, I should say. So now, and it's a div. Why? Oh, I zoomed out so much. Go back to 100%. And if you notice, my element being passed as JSX, okay, needs to be capitalized. And then it's going to go and work its magic with the React DOM virtual engine. Okay, so at its very basic core, this is like the most basic component we could ever make. Just a JavaScript function that returns some JSX. Then we pass it in, and actually should have a semicolon there, and we pass it into our render method as JSX as well. Cool. Does anyone have any questions about that so far, or any comments? It's not super great. Let me read your stuff in just a minute. Let me move on, Harrison, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. It's not imperative that you do this. So Christopher asks, is there a way to do this without Babel? Will we always need it? We will always need Babel. And the reason for that is because Babel gives us features that the Google Chrome engine does not give us right away. So we can already use the new features of JavaScript that are being built into the language by simply passing everything through Babel. Okay? And so because of that, as long as the JavaScript language is evolving and we want to use the new features of the language, then yes, we will need Babel. Yep, don't worry about the console warnings with the Babel transpiler. It's the same thing with me. You're using the in-browser Babel transformer. This is just saying don't do this in production. This is just for sandboxing. Okay? Okay, so notice that this component looks exactly like an anonymous arrow function that we've named myElement. And I'm just going to change this back over to basic component so that it fits our documentation that's found in Training Kit. By the way, I'm almost virtually reading word for word what's in Training Kit. So when you go back and reference it, you can find it all there for React 1. Okay, this is my curriculum that I worked with the team to put together, and because of that, it's like I could literally get you the examples, and we're going to get a lot of cool examples that may or may not exist in there as well. Okay, so while a component can of course get a lot more complicated than this, fundamentally all a component does is render out some sort of JSX, which then eventually makes it into HTML. Okay, so let's extend out the functionality of this and create a few components that we can include into our application. Because components can be built as simple functions that return a chunk of UI, we can pass them into other components in a compositional way. And this idea of composition, composing your application, is a huge, huge deal. Okay. Before we move on, I will try and debug Harrison's code, unless rename it to name and const. Okay. Sweet. Let me know if you need anything else, Harrison. Okay. So let me see. You have your script text Babel. That's commented out. Const myElement equals an h1 heading hello world. Interesting. And then you're getting name. Interesting. I don't know why that wouldn't work. I mean, I can try and debug it right now. Let me just do that, and we'll move straight forward right after. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't like that. It doesn't like being called name, I guess. Okay, it's not just that. Get element by ID target. That is bizarre, man. I'm trying to see what this, oh, new element. That worked for me. So it must just not like the word name. If you capitalize it, it worked. That's cool. Okay, cool. Moving forward, just want to make sure that any questions like that were addressed real quick. Okay, the most basic of components is just returning one single thing to the DOM. Okay. All right, so now let's actually create an application. Instead of calling this basic component, we're going to call this app. Okay. An app is actually going to be responsible for pulling in a bunch of other components. So because of that, I'm going to return in parentheses our application. And then we'll just wrap the whole thing in a div. Okay, just like normal. I'm going to wrap the whole thing in a div. We're going to say, you know, app mounted to DOM. Great. App mounted to DOM. We're getting native object create of undefined. I'm trying to figure out where that is, but it's yeah. Not really sure. Don't really care at this point about that. Type error. Okay, maybe it's coming from one of our CDNs. Okay. Okay, so now that we have our boilerplate app, our app is mounted, we are up and running, and notice, it's just this. We pulled in these script tags, great, that's not that big a deal, but it's just this. We have an application mounted to the DOM that could take you 5 minutes to put up and get up and running, even if you typed it all the way out. But now let's see the power of composition. So the idea of creating a bunch of elements and mounting them up to the DOM via our app. So our app is going to take some elements that we're going to create, and it's going to mount these elements to the DOM for us. Okay, so we're going to make a couple of components here. So the first component I'm going to make is going to be called basic button. And a component is just a JavaScript function. We're going to return a button and whose innards are basic button. Okay, that's the children, basic button right there, right? Let's actually give this we don't need a type or anything, and we don't need to worry about anything else right now. That's it for now. That's all we're going to do. And now look at how this is going to work. We can take our button, and we can say, instead of just mounting this div, let's actually mount our button too. Give this a little pizzazz. Refresh the page. Check it out. Now, if we need that same button, just our basic button, all we have to do is just add a bunch of them to the screen. Look at what we're going to get. Buttons for days. I mean, how cool is this, right? This is just how, I mean, you can build functions that make your HTML for you. So all they are just components and constructors. You guys already did this last week. You played around with these types of elements, these types of constructors, types of, you know, building blocks. So we're going to take this and we're going to make a compositional project together. Yep. This is how Facebook makes their stuff. They do it in a more sophisticated, more architecturally sound way than just an index.html file. But this is the technology behind the app that, you know, most of us use on a day-to-day basis. Okay. So now let's add a couple more elements to the screen, or let's actually create a couple of more components, like a basic input, and whose type is going to be a text type. And it is in this fashion that we build large-scale applications today. We're going to call it type text. Okay, and then placeholder, we're going to say React.js. And then we'll do one more. We'll abstract our heading here. We'll build a component that says basic header. Everything's basic because we're not getting super complicated today. Okay, now feed these in the way that we need to. In fact, I can just do that and that. Change the word here, and we have built a little application. Let's compose an app with components. This is our app. All we did was just sort of take some of the stuff and build it out in its own little way. Yes, that is very worth mentioning. Thank you, Lucas. So, and I could type in here, could click my button. I mean, not very useful yet, but you're going to get there. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to share this code because you are now going to be tasked to taking this and making a bunch of DOM elements and creating a bunch of things put together. And you're going to do that for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll meet back and we will actually, so let's see, I think there's an exercise in here. Let me see real quick. Yeah, it's pretty basic, the challenge. The challenge is this. Oh, you're going to follow along with the design files. Never mind. That's going to be later this afternoon. Okay, so your challenge for now is to recreate this functionality with a bunch of different DOM elements. So see how many components you can create from scratch. Everything is functions, absolutely. And then eventually we take functions and we abstract it a little bit further. Are those parens JSX syntax? Let me show you. So these parens are just JavaScript syntax. This allows us to do something. Okay, so let me do one more basic thing. So const basic div. We're going to say this is our reusable div. Return, and I could just do this on one line. But the problem here is if I tried to break my line and say I want to nest in some other div, inner div. So because of that, I need to wrap this in a multi-line statement. And that's just vanilla JS. That is just a multi-line statement from a return statement allows you to return more than one simple thing. Okay. Basic div, let's put that in here as well. There we go, inner div, awesome. Okay, so now over the next 15 minutes, I want you to take what you have from that file that I've given you in Slack, okay, and on your own, I want you to take the time and build out as many different DOM elements. Get creative. Create a little page about yourself, maybe a header that's your first name and last name, and then your occupation as a student or whatever you do in the evenings if you're working as well, or wherever you come from in your occupation. Tell us your age, write basically some information about yourself composed in this fashion. Each thing that you want rendered to the DOM needs to be its own component. Okay, so notice all my stuff inside of Target is my outer div, which is here, and then I have my h1 tag, my inner div, my nested divs, input, and a basic button. And then what I'm going to do after we get back from our 15-minute break is I'm going to show, or our 15-minute exercise, I'm going to show you how to make this all reusable and even style some stuff and show you how to get up and running with making this stuff look pretty, because it's one thing to create the elements, but your task this afternoon is actually going to be recreating some UI in this fashion. Okay, so go for it, 15 minutes. I'll start a timer. This time I'll actually start the timer. I'll leave my screen up so you can see it. Okay. Let me zoom in on that. And we will reconvene then. So have fun. I'm going to stop recording for a minute, and we'll get back in action in just a few minutes. All right, 30 seconds left to wrap things up, and we will move forward into more information on why components are so amazing. At a first glance, we're sort of looking at these things, and it's just like they're just functions that return stuff. Yeah, React is HTML Legos. And yes, I love this approach of taking, the smaller building blocks and, adding more and more to it. Okay, timer's up, and that's super loud in my ears, so we're going to move forward. Okay, so remember that as I mentioned earlier, you can pass attributes or props around to your elements, okay? So if I wanted to, let's see, is this even going to work in the way that I want it to? It's not, because it's not going through Webpack. Okay, neither here nor there. All we have done thus far is make some pretty basic, and they're even called basic, components, okay? But let's take this a step further, and none of this right now is in React 1, but you're gonna wanna be able to use it since we've been able to plow through this, this material today. We're gonna take this a step further, and we're gonna learn something that's a little bit more, advanced, that we would be getting to towards tomorrow. But now you're gonna be able to use it in, you're going to be able to use this, what we're about to talk about, in your assignment this afternoon. And when I say assignment, I mean assignments. So, yeah, cool. So reusability, Kyle, you've got it right on the, hit it right on the head of what we're about to talk about is reusability. Cool. So let's talk about this. Okay. So let's take this in terms of, let's get rid of our div. I don't care about that anymore. And I'll keep our header just because it's there and it's telling us what we're doing. But in terms of our input and our basic component, we're using these in a very specific way, or sorry, in a very non-specific way. All we're doing is just mounting the static rendering of this stuff to the DOM. Okay, just basic components and placeholder. We've got a little input field. I'm going to bump up the zoom quality on that. How is that zoom resolution? You guys can see a little better? Just like a thumbs up or thumbs down. If you need me to go in bigger, we're good. Okay, cool. So basic button. Let's make this a reusable thing. Okay, there's a couple of things that are some more advanced / fundamental concepts of React. Okay. Now I mentioned earlier when we console.logged that element to the screen. Let's actually try this. I haven't done this before, so if this fails on me, I'll be really interested to see what happens. Basic button. Really interested to see this. I have no clue what's going to happen here. Ah, it's doing it. Beautiful. Look, this is react.createElement. This symbol, which is a React element symbol, has this thing on it automatically called props. There's some other things to take note here as well. This is a basic button type, so it's a functional component. We see that because of this F symbol right here. That's saying that thing is a function. It's not a class. It's not an object. It's a function, okay? It's returning out some sort of DOM. And then there's this props object. Okay, ref is another thing that you may learn about later on as you discover the documentation. React, we actually don't use refs for any of our React patterns here in at Lambda School. You can use them; they're a powerful tool if you learn how to use wield them well. But the idea of props is what I want to get to right now. So every single React element has this props on it. Okay, has this props property on it, and it's an object of all the things that we can use about that function. You'll see later on in place of refs. I personally feel like there's a very specific place and time to use them, and it's not that we replace them. It's just you never need them if you design your apps the way that we design them. If for inputs and things, that's the only place that I would use refs. to gain access to the input value, but you can do that with the synthetic event and with a name property or something. Okay, so you'll get there. You'll see what we use in terms of like event handling. Okay. Okay. So our basic button is a function. It's a type function here, and then it's got this props object. All React components have access to that props object. Let's see what that looks like. So props is the optional parameter that you could pass to your component. So now if I go back and console.log, or if I just console.log inside of my basic button, before the return statement, my props object, and I'm going to label it real quick as well, so you can see what's going on under the hood. We're going to say button props. Don't need that capital U. Okay. Refresh that, and look, we get our object. Cool. So when using React, we can combine HTML and JavaScript together. That's what components are. It's just JavaScript and then JSX. Yep. So the answer is yes. You don't have to mess with one too much. You just use it like this. You use it like normal. Okay. The space is purely convention. This is purely convention. Okay. It'll render and work the same, but all documentation and all examples out there will show a space between, and you're about to find out why right now, Caitlin. Okay, so this right here, our basic button, has this props object ready for us. Okay, we have the ability to pass some attributes to our basic button, or things that look like attributes. Could be anything we want. Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to pass here is just going to be our text. And as text, I'm just going to pass the string click me. Okay, refresh the page, and now if you look, check out our props. So did you notice that? Props became whatever we passed to basic button. Basic button being built in this way. It's fun to say, basic button built this way. You get the opportunity, and any single component can do this. Every single component that you build in React can take attributes, and then they're going to assign those attributes by name and value to a key value pair or key value pairing on the props object. So notice we're console logging props up here. We're passing props into our functional component, and it has to be named props. This can't be boo. It can't be that. Actually, in this case, it can. Okay, that's funny. In this case, it can. Later on, that's going to fail. Okay, so just always call this argument props. Props do not need to be inside of parentheses, because arrow functions can take foo and return. We'll do an implicit return here, just foo. Then I can call my arrow func, pass it bar. If it's a single property or single argument being passed to this, we didn't see that because we'd have to console log it. Alert. If it's a single property being passed to an arrow function, you don't need parentheses around it. Yeah, this is an implicit return, so you don't even need the return keyword anymore. See that? So there's a lot to arrow functions of stuff that gives you shortcuts. Okay. So just remember that if you're just passing a single argument to your function, a single parameter, you don't need parentheses around it. You could leave the parentheses on, and you'd be just fine. But more than likely, your compiler will want you to just do something like this, or your JS Prettier package. Yep, one argument in arrow function does not require parentheses, which is nice. There's a lot of cool things about arrow functions that make your life a little easier. Okay, but now you can see the power of this, right? Because I have access to this props object. So if I wanted to, instead of rendering basic button as my button's text, if I wanted to render click me instead, what would I have to pass in between my button as a child? How would I reference props inside this function? Remember, we're just in a JavaScript function here. Props.text, right? And it's not going to be this because we're not even in a constructor. So I understand exactly where that comment is coming from, Lucas, but you don't need this because we're not in a class, okay? Okay, but what happens when I just run props.text? Uh-oh. What's going on here? Well, the idea is that this button is just simply rendering some text that we pass to it. Okay, so it's going to read this as a string, props.text, and interpolate it, or interpolate it as such, meaning it's going to take that string and literally bring that string out and say props.text on our button. Let me just zoom in a little bit on that, because that may not be that clear. Notice, I'm doing nothing here. So with React, inside of JSX, inside of a function, if you want something to be dynamic, it's a lot like template strings without the $sign. All you have to do is just wrap it in curly braces. And now React knows to take this, find an object called props, look for a property on that object called text, and return that variable, that value, click me, notice text, click me, turn that into text, okay? And thus is how you make things dynamic inside of React. Yep. Basically, so what you're doing with these curly braces is called interpolation. Okay, interpolate. It's a commonly used word in the React framework or library ecosystem. And you've done it all the time already when you've interpolated variables inside of backticks. So you've seen this syntax before where I could now write hello from props.text. It's the same type of idea, but React treats it a little differently. Notice that we don't need any of that with the $sign, and then it's literally interpolating those things. If I wanted this to do it the JavaScript way, it would then, you could wrap it and interpolate the whole screen. Okay? So a couple of things there to remember. Whenever you want, and this is gonna be a gotcha. Whenever you want to reference that object, you're gonna want to call it as props.text. Okay? Haha, Aaron, you are leading me to my exact next thing. So Aaron just brought up the point that is like super cool about all this. Because what if I created a button and I did not handle anything, like I didn't even set the text value? Okay, let's see what happens with our button. Uh-oh, what now? So, built into the React ecosystem, built into components, there is this property on your component called, and it is that simple. And when you get into classes, you can static these. Later on, you'll learn a little bit more about that. Maybe we'll touch on that this week. I don't know. I don't know if I'm prepared to go into a full in-depth conversation about statics. We'll take it the constructor way instead, I think. But either way, this particular default props property will allow you to say, hey, if text is not passed, set text equal to click me. And let's actually change this to clicky. I don't know what else to say there. Okay, so now watch this magic happen. And think about this in terms of reusability. Being able to take your component and use it in any other context across your application by using this thing called props. And then using this thing called default props to default the text. Okay, let's refresh the page. Let's see the magic. Woo! 2 buttons. One of them we didn't supply with anything. Now, I can make as many buttons as I want. And I could say, Charles, in charge of our, I don't know, this is getting out of hand. Charles in charge. Cool. And look at all of our buttons. All reusable. How does this translate in terms of styling? Well, if I wanted to, I could come into this HTML document and I could create a style tag. Inside of here, I could say header. Well, let's just say button styles. And then we'll follow a good CSS convention here, I guess. I'm not good at CSS conventions because all the CSS I've written in the recent years has been in JavaScript. Yes, you can write CSS in JavaScript nowadays, which is super cool. And we will show you over the next couple of weeks a couple of examples of that. Unless you have already gotten them. I'm not sure if you have or not. Okay, so button styles. Let me think here. So button styles, let's just say that text color is going to be a nice gray. Sorry, when I said text color, I meant to just say color. And then we'll say background will be a good, that's two, that's not, I'm looking for like a, I don't know, D. Nope. What's like a good dark, like a light black, like not all the way black? Does anyone know? Like, yeah, that'll work. I'll do 222. Cool. That's what I want. Great. Now we're going to create all these buttons, and we'll just say border none for now. Just make them sort of flat-ish. We'll see how this looks. But if I wanted all my buttons to be the same, I could say my buttons class name equals, what did I call that property? Button styles. Nice. Semantic. Great. Look at our beautiful buttons. But now, how do I make them like, what if I want this to be a red button and this one a blue button, this one a pink button, whatever? Well, let's make our class name dynamic and say props.class name. In fact, I don't even want to call this class name. Yeah, I'll call class name. Because now I can say class name here at the component level, and I can say I want this to be a certain style. And I'll just pass it the text because this is where I want it. And notice, only one that gets it is the one that I defined. Dynamic styling. It's up here inside of a style tag in this document, and I'll give you this whole document. Remember, the exercises you're going to be working on today are actually in CodePen, where you have your single index.html, whatever, that's fine. And then you have your styles tab, and I'll pull them up and I'll show you what to do. And then you have your JavaScript, and they're all built out of the box, ready for you to work in a React playground environment. Okay? I'm trying to think if there, I mean, a couple of other things that lend themselves towards the MV or the post MVP of your assignments this afternoon are, function handlers. So if I had an on-click handler and set that equal to an anonymous function, and inside of that anonymous function, I just called some handle click function, I could define my handle click function and I could alert clicked. Or to get more fancy, I could alert probably prop, well, we'll see. Never mind. We'll do this real quick. So now if I refresh that, hopefully this works. Yeah. So now I'm linked up to my buttons. Notice that my on-click property here has camel casing. This is camel cased. Okay? So that'll be post MVP for anything that you need to use today to provide some sort of functionality. You could do any logic here, right, inside of this function, you know, inside of the reference of this document. And as long as basic button can read it, we can play around with things, okay? And then the last thing, I just want to console.log before I let you go and show you what's under the hood now on our component. And notice all of our props are different. Dynamic props. One of them has button styles as a class name. These are all props. Props.foo, props.bar, props.text. Anything I add to my components, and this is going to start to get a little bit crowded. So anything I add to my, you know, to my components where I'm calling them in. So if I said foo equals bar, guess what? That's going to exist, right? Props get set right here. If I want default props, you just reference the object default props. But if we look at our basic button, there it is. Notice that on the prototype, somewhere, maybe it's somewhere else. On click. It goes handle click. It would only exist on one of them. It wouldn't exist on the thing itself. It would only exist on the props. And so it would be on the instance of it down here. So never mind. Default props. I was trying to find that on click handler, but because we would have to actually look at the elements, so I was leading you down a path of destruction. So if we look at that first Charles, or actually they should all have something. Never mind. I'm getting wacky trying to find that thing, but it's okay. But notice everything just turns into JavaScript. And on this thing, we have all these attributes, class, button, style. So if you want dynamic classes, you can follow this pattern and you can combine as many classes as you want here. You know, if you wanted to add another class that's specific to the styling that you wanted it for, notice, remember, this one is styled in a special way that the other ones aren't. Eventually, Anthony, you'll be using a separate file or many separate files. Yep, exactly, Lucas. If you're in CodePen, you should be able to just do it right out of the bat. Okay, let me give you this all as... So notice, okay, so sibling classes. So instead of wrapping everything in a div, is that what you mean, Christopher? Two classes on the same element, meaning like, because this is what I'm doing right now. These are the same class, or they're not classes yet. We're not using classes yet, just functional components. So these are CSS class. Okay, cool, beautiful. Sorry, there's two different things. Okay, so you could do multiple things here. Props.className is a thing, right? You could say all buttons get the same characteristics, and if you wanted to, you could just pass this into string interpolation. Okay, so let's say that all buttons got the same button styles. Okay, and then they also got an optional class name, and I'm going to change that to be something else. Okay. I'll change that to be something else. So this would be the original. Let's say all of them were this. And let's say that this is like changing the background color of a class. Sorry, of an element. And then background color needs to be defined here. And we're going to say that this is going to be BG button red, or button BG red, instead of that dark. Okay, so now if I save that and refresh, all of them will have the black, the off black, and then I could create a new class that the background was red. And any of the classes that I add to that, so I could take this and I could just add as many of these as I wanted. And so one way to achieve this would be to simply, create a property for it. Cool. All right, your mission for this afternoon, and I'll let you get with your project managers and have them tell you how they want you to work. We recommend, of course, pair programming as always. So I'll have them say, get you in your pairs. You'll find the React UI components GitHub repository inside of Training Kit under the project description of React 1. There are 2 files here and some instructions. The first file, you're going to be building this card using React inside of a code pen that's provided for you. The next file, you're going to be building this calculator inside of a code pen also provided for you. And you'll notice that the code pen for both of those are found in that document. Okay? And you'll notice that you have everything set up to write your CSS and your app inside of CodePen. Code's coming its way. Sorry about the lagging of the video. I'm not sure if it's my bandwidth or just the fact that we're there. But yeah, it could definitely have been me. I'm sorry about that. I have a lot of, my fan has been running hot all morning. Okay? All right, gang, that is the most basic introduction to React.js I could possibly come up with that allows you to take this foundation and ramp up into some more fundamental principles tomorrow. Yeah, okay. From here on out, I will stop my video while presenting. Cool. All right. CS9, your reputation precedes you. You are fantastic. I'm excited to work with you this week. I absolutely love React.js. This is my bread and butter. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And have fun working on the assignments. Josh spent a little bit of time last week curating those PNG files for you. There are some assets available for you for use. But yeah, they really just follow along. Try and get through all of the basic requirements for both of these, and then work on the stretch problems for each. Okay? And please have fun. All right, gang, go to lunch, come back, get in your groups, meet with your PMs. We'll talk to you soon.